Few years back when I did my first Instagram post reviewing a movie, it was for what at the time was Sean Baker's latest film, The Florida Project. So I thought it made sense that for the first video on the channel we get to explore what makes his filmography so special and even important for the current state of cinema. So Sean Baker and his crew just recently swept the Oscars with Anora. I didn't watch most of the event, but I was lucky enough to have watched what I gather afterwards was the best moment of the night. Correct. Adrian Brody verbally jerking off on stage and rambling for longer than anybody would have wanted him to. Besides that, the moment that came closest to being that great was Sean Baker's last speech, and I believe third speech of the night, talking about the importance and the beauty of independent cinema and encouraging people to experience movies at the movie theater, which brought a spark of hope in my heart for the future of cinema. Because one thing is for you to get an Oscar, be on stage, and they say, hey, let's all save independent cinema together. But the fact that the guy who did it was the guy that made probably the best movie ever shot in an iPhone, well, it makes it a very powerful statement. When Tangerine started to come up in the festivals back in the mid-2010s, I don't know what kind of expectation people had when they went and watched it, but I actually watched this movie for the first time for the video, and I would say that this movie looks great. I honestly thought it would be a lot more jarring visually, especially understanding it's an older iPhone. I mean, Sean Baker shot this movie with an iPhone 5S and an anamorphic lens attached to it. I thought it would take a little more getting used to, but in reality, this is truly a beautiful looking movie, in which case the iPhone quality flows wonderfully with the attitude this movie carries from beginning to end. Speaking of, this movie's got a lot of motherfucking attitude. The first few minutes of the film are so much fun, it's so explosive. And even more importantly, it makes you understand the world and the reality of these characters instantly. You get immersed in their world, and as the movie progresses, you only get deeper into these fascinating little chunk of the world that you just don't get to see too much of if you're not part of it. This being precisely one of the most recurrent themes in Sean Baker's filmography, as we'll see later. In this movie, set in Santa Monica, California, we follow two trans girls in a day in their lives. In the first scenes of the movie, both characters embark the journey they'll be following for at least the rest of the day, until the tangerine colored sunset of California comes down, and then they'll regroup eventually as night settles. We also follow what I can assume is an immigrant Armenian taxi driver, which is in essence the third main character of the story. As we follow our main characters for the first 2/3 of the story, the movie is all about presenting to us the raw reality in which these characters live in. Every corner of these streets is equally as dingy as it is full of personality. Guerrilla filmmaking at its finest. And that's where the magic of the movie is. Getting thrown into what feels like such a real story guided by real people. Every little interaction is so pure. Baker makes the most out of what he has to work with. Every close-up feels intimate, visceral. You can really feel that specific heat of late December in the air. Every person capturing camera feels like they belong right on that piece of street they currently find themselves in. You may go into the movie not even knowing that all trans girls in the movie are not professional actors, but rather real people that more or less live life like these. The movie never breaks the spell of making you believe everything you're watching is real, because in many aspects, it is. A lot can be said and has been said about realism in movies. Baker has been asked a few times through the years if his art is inspired by the classic Italian realism of the 60s and 70s, or perhaps Jean-Luc Godard movies. And Sean just goes like, truly dude, I just watched like fucking Die Hard and the fucking Avengers movies, you know what I mean? But in reality, I see the approach as something beyond going for a specific stylistic way of making movies. This is to me just a guy with an interest in people, different type of people. I see a curious artist with a lot of passion and creativity and very little means. His style of filmmaking is clearly inspired by necessity. That's what makes me connect so much with his films. I relate to that, and I'm sure a lot of us do. I think he's an incredible writer too, and I'm not sure how much effort he puts into the details of his writing. I will believe just by the nature of it all, he's probably great at conducting a vision. But I'm sure so much of these great moments in his movies are born from the realities of what he's exploring. This type of filmmaking, I'm sure, requires a particularly looser and more free-flowing approach. Generally, you hear directors talk about finding the scene when shooting it. David Lynch calls it being dreamy, playing with the scene once it's off the page. Some creative egos probably have had a harder time letting the scene become something actually unexpected. Many great directors are as great as they are partly because of their ego and the rigidness they have with their script. And is that rigidness in execution what makes their movies as special as they are? It's what creates a unique vision. It's what injects them with personality. Here, I think probably the opposite is true. You can tell he puts a great amount of trust in his main stars. I mean, Sean explained that the plot of the movie used real-life stories of the main girls to inform the script, which I'm sure helps to make this movie as fucking funny as it is. This movie is so funny. It doesn't hold back from allowing you to laugh with or at its characters. If you've ever been around people, anything like what you see in this movie, it just adds layers to how funny it is. Because you know that that's how they really are. Which only makes the sad parts even sadder. Because the reality of it all sets in your mind, and that's when the movie fulfills its duty. It makes you aware of these situations, it makes you connect and empathize, and it makes you actually go, fuck, this happens. People live this way. They have days like these every day of their lives. It makes you understand the intricacies of the characters and how they relate to each other. How ultimately this is a community conformed by dysfunctional people that make things work at the end of the day. Or do they though? I live in South Florida, and while this movie was shot in LA, I can tell you I feel like I've walked those streets and met some of these characters too. I've seen the ugliness and the beauty of it all, as well as I've been lucky enough to have the Tangerine light of sunset serve as the cinematography of my life, and it's truly wonderful to experience. So like I said, I currently live in South Florida, but I actually spent the last couple years of my life living in Orlando, so this one hits close to home. I love the Florida Project. When this movie came out, it had a really big impact in me, as a person, as a fan of movies, and as an aspiring filmmaker. For the video, this was the third time that I watched it, and it had been a few years since my last watch. And it just became a little harder for me to watch it this time around because, similarly to Tangerine, this is a harsh reality these characters live in. And here you experience most of the movie alongside children. In this movie, we follow the most realistic kids I've seen portrayed in a movie. They're living life in a motel on the surrounding areas of the Disney parks. From the get-go, the irony of the setting lands the message clearly. On the surroundings of the so-called happiest place on earth live these marginalized groups of people whom struggle to get by day. Even the name, the Florida Project, functions as a reference for the original working name Walt Disney assigned to the plans of building the parks back in the 60s. As well as the word project referencing government subsidized low rent apartment buildings often associated with areas of low socioeconomic status. Or as the Brazilian lady says in the movie, Projeto. Sean has an immense talent to recognize not only people, but physical locations that complement the stories he tells to perfection. The main location of this story is a purple motel that both looks gorgeous and run down at the same time. The look and feel of the motel does a great job at encapsulating the community that it's made up of. Mooney, our main character, lives in this motel with her mom, who's this white, trashy punk character. She does a fantastic job. This movie also has that mix in the cast of real people portraying fictionalized versions of themselves. And the mom is the main highlight. At that moment, she was, I believe, an Instagram influencer that Sean thought would be perfect for the role, and goddammit was he right. She embodies the character of young, trashy, pothead mom like very few have ever done in the silver screen. These kids are rude, obnoxious, random, loud, problematic, and yet their innocence shines all throughout the movie. This movie is an exploration of child innocence, how to keep the light of childhood glowing under circumstances like these. You get to go with them through what these kids see as their playtime, which is essentially any time of day when the sun is out. For them, playtime may involve terrorizing their neighbors, assisting tourists into the motel, or just going for ice cream. And let me talk to you about the GOAT himself, Mr. Willem Dafoe's presence in this movie. Just as Bobby is the foundation in which the motel runs, Dafoe is the foundation in which this movie flows. What a treat to see him here do this role as the father of this community. If you haven't seen too much of Willem Dafoe just being a good, pleasant human being, well, watch this movie. Which leads me to a bit of a tangent. Back in 2018, I remember how much fans of film and cinema were hoping for this movie to get nominated for the Oscars. And look, personally, I don't put much or any weight at all on the Oscars as a measure of artistic prowess. But certainly they do have a responsibility with cinema, especially American cinema. And the Florida Project was such an impactful, current, American real life tale. It was such an achievement, and hey, this was probably one of my favorite years for movies in the last decade, alright? It was packed. But the fact that The Post was nominated and not this movie, The Post. Do you remember The Post? Directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep. The Post. Do you remember The Post? Who under 50 has watched The Post? Reviews for this movie must be like, acting was extremely adequate. Yeah, no shit. Point is, at least Willem Dafoe got a nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and the movie made some type of appearance back then. Still with a limited budget, but 12 times bigger than it was for Tangerine, Sean once again maximizes his resources masterfully for this one. Everything that he does great in Tangerine, he just does better in this movie from a filmmaking standpoint. This movie looks beautiful. It's such a talent to be able to make the mundane look so good. So strangely appealing. Camera movements are classy, a lot of low angle shots imitating the POV of the children, making the world just seem a little bit bigger, kinda like we did when we were kids. And just like in Tangerine, the heart of this movie lies on the sense of community. I noticed something that I believe captures greatly the way these movies treat their characters. In both movies, there is a scene where two characters meet in rather troublesome situations, one worse than the other, and when you watch them, you'll know what I mean. But these characters are introduced to each other as opposition, as one of them being mad at the other, but they actually end up forming bonds. This doesn't happen immediately, but by just being so genuinely themselves and showing that they're not really interested in having grudges, they just allow each other into their lives. In both movies this happens. That's such a beautiful lesson I did not notice the first few times I watched the Florida Project. It's subtle, but it's there. And I think of the current state of society as the one that surrounds many of us. We're all so detached from each other. We avoid others constantly. We hate and fear different people more and more as social media helps us validate our points and our own logic with the click of a button. We've forgotten how to live with others, embracing them for the human they are. And that's what makes this movie so wonderful. These realities tend to either stay outside of public eye, or even worse, they're demonized by the media, treated as less. From this exploration, you can discover so much of your own reality. Just as you can develop a sense of empathy, you're also reminded that there is so much to learn from all corners of life. So much to be thankful for. And by the end of the movie, you're left wondering on the power of hope. Can you still be hopeful in front of the immense pain of uncertainty? Religious or not, what do you do when faith dissipates? When everything seems lost? And speaking of the end of the movie, If you gave me 100 tries right before the last scene of the movie to choose a way to end this story, I would have never come up with what they came up with. Either you get it or you don't, but the end of this movie breaks me every time. Up there as one of my favorite last seconds of any movie I've watched.